I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Visitor Network TV. We have with us today BrianTurbitt, the new finance director of the town of Nantucket. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. How are you doing today, Dan?
Well, thank you. You've been here for about a month now, right?
A little over a month, yes. I started on June 16th.
Tell us a little bit about your background, how you found yourself in municipal finance.
Okay, sure. Well, I originally was a finance director in Millbury for just about the past 6 years. I started in November of 2008. Prior to that, I had spent the majority of my career in the public sector, basically working with startups, but
in the private sector.
In the private sector, with startups doing internal controls, budgeting, forecasting, working with securing venture financing for funding, things of that nature. We did stints at 3 startups. And about probably
Can you tell us any household names?
No, well, actually one of them, ironically enough, was I started a company called ZMed, which made cancer treating equipment, and was acquired by a company called Varian Medical, which makes the majority of the linear accelerators that do treat cancer. So that was one of the companies. Then I had the opportunity to work for another company that was in the cosmetics industry. And then the last company that I worked with was a technology company that had a ticketing platform for train sales, primarily focused in Europe, but Amtrak over here is getting bigger, so that was one of the platforms that we dealt with too. Probably about June of 2008, startups was very fun, but it can be very difficult because of the up and down nature of them. You know, they start today.
And that was when the economy was tanking.
When the economy was starting to tank, and the last one that I was involved with was the company doing the train ticketing sales, and of course that's a leisure item for a lot of people. So not as many people were traveling to Europe and so on and so forth. So I started thinking I may want to consider changing careers a little bit into something a little bit more stable. And I was on the finance committee in Millbury, and had learned.
Are you from there originally?
No, I'm originally from Vermont. Been down here in Massachusetts, primarily in Millbury, for about 12 years. So the finance director role in Millbury came up, so I put my name in, and I had also served as the chairman of the finance committee. So I was.
So
lucky.
It wasn't a total rude awakening.
It was not a total rude awakening. There was a little bit of rude awakening through some of it, because it certainly. Government accounting in Massachusetts is certainly a little different than other places in how you have to record things and defer revenues and receivables and book them. So it was a little bit different. But having been on the finance committee, it certainly made my transition a little bit easier. But I had also never been involved in working with the assessor's office and setting a tax rate or anything of that nature. So there was a transition. I was very fortunate in Millbury that the assessor that had been there for almost 30 years, so had a very good handle on it. And the treasurer collector in Millbury had a very good handle on their department. So when I went in, Millbury, the audit had 4 significant deficiencies, and I was essentially charged with making sure that those were cleaned up, which was the first task that I had. Successfully completed that in the first year, and then moved on to really streamlining the operations and kind of making them more efficient and working on getting better at budgeting and forecasting. So I did that for about 5.5 years, and
how big a town is Millbury?
Millbury has just about 13,000 residents.
What's the amount of their budget? What's
their general fund budget is about $36 million. They have one enterprise fund, which is a sewer enterprise fund, which is about $1.5 million. So it's a little bit smaller than Nantucket, but as I like to say to people, government accounting, no matter where you go, is the same. The numbers may be larger in a different community, but the process is the same across the state of Massachusetts in terms of how you handle it for the state. Now, Nantucket's processes in terms of payables and AP and warrants and thing may be a little different than the process that we had in Millbury, but at the end of the day, the standards that we work with are all the same. So those don't change.
But those are quite different. The standards for a municipal body, a town or a village or city are very different than they are for private enterprise.
They are very much different from a private enterprise. And one of the biggest differences in private enterprises with receivables, you recognize the revenue when you would do a billing. Okay.
Right.
In governmental accounting, we defer all the revenue until we actually receive the payment.
So you're on a cash basis.
So we're on more of a cash basis than an accrual or basis. So it is different in terms of that, which is one of the biggest differences that I found when I came from the private sector as well.
What attracted you to Nantucket?
Well, I think a lot of things attracted me to Nantucket. The island itself attracted me. The opportunity, having read a lot of the management letter recently, and looking at it, and a lot of the comments that were in the most recent management letter are not necessarily different than what I faced when I was in Millbury. And I think at the point that I was at in Millbury, we had really, for me, I was looking for an opportunity to go to a community and try to work with the community and implement and help move the finance department forward. I think there's a really great staff in Nantucket in the finance department, and I think there's a great structure in place. It's really a lot of fine tuning and reviewing the processes and trying to determine where we can come up with some efficiencies. And then it's working on forecasting, and really I think forecasting is one of the biggest roles in my job. And forecasting, developing a good forecast enables a community to move forward in a predictable manner. And it enables you to see where, I like to say, where the pinch points, where you may have problems in future years are. And, forecasts for me usually are only 3 to 5 years. Anything over 5 years is really kind of our very best guess to throw at a dartboard, so to speak. So I think that's one of the areas that I've really kind of focusing on. They've done a great job with a 10-year capital plan, and they have a forecast. So it's really melding all of those together. And for me, it's a great opportunity to work with some other enterprise funds, the airports, a water company, the solid waste enterprise fund, the island home enterprise fund. So,
because all of those, at least 3 of the 4 that you mentioned, I'm not sure about the solid waste, they all have another set of rules that governs them, along with the town and the municipal
They do, and
rules.
it can be a challenge.
And they're not all the same.
They're not all the same. Some of those enterprise funds have boards or commissions that are also responsible that we have to work with as well, which is always a work in process to be able to meld all the different personalities together and get to the end result. But it's been a great transition so far for me. The staff has been great. I've met with the airport commission. I've met with some of the people from the water company. Everybody has been great and very welcoming and very willing to help. And so I think we have a good process, or start to a good process in place to make a good transition to getting to one of my end results is producing forecasts that we can base our decisions on and make sound decisions as we move forward. Because if you look at the capital plan that's been produced, there's a lot of capital needs across the entire enterprise, and it's looking at how do we fit those into the normal operating budget, or into how do we manage the debt to go along with those. So
I don't know if this figure is exactly right, but looking at the town's budget, something like 80% is personnel costs, right?
Which is typical.
Which is typical.
Typical in an enterprise.
There is sort of 10% round numbers that is roughly discretionary.
Yeah, that's
round numbers.
Round numbers.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily far off. That's correct.
And then the other 10% is debt service.
Typically, yes.
Which people don't really think about when they think about the need for the capital for a new school or for a new sewer line or whatever it might be.
Sure.
And so that sort of disappears there, but if you're not careful, it has a number of implications.
It does. It has a lot of implications, and that's one of the goals is to really look at what is our level of debt service, and look at it as compared to what we need in the future, what we're doing now, and how to manage it within the overall operations. Because there are options in Massachusetts on how we do debt. There's debt exclusions and so on, which allow us to raise it outside the levy limit. But it all has to be managed properly, whether we're doing a debt exclusion or whether it's debt that's funded through the normal 2.5 operating.
You mean an override?
Well, a debt exclusion is a temporary override.
Right.
Yes, it's for a limited period of time. It's only for the length of the project, so it's very limited. It's not permanent. It's typically how most debt is funded throughout the state. But the forecast and the budgeting and the debt and the long-term capital plan all really are one living document that you update on an annual basis, and you need to pay attention to.
How is the process going? I know you haven't been here very long, but the process going in terms of determining the priorities for some of the long-term capital
Well, I think that
projects.
process is really, from my perspective and my history, is always a work in progress, because I can lay out I could lay out a 10-year forecast today for debt for capital planning, and we could prioritize that today. And a week from now, something could happen which would completely reprioritize that. So these documents, really, you just don't do them once and then update them in 10 years. You really, they're living documents in my world that we look at every day or every month on how, comparing to operations, is there something that's changed in what we know today that we didn't know when we were building those, and how do we move the items
But
around?
ultimately, you don't set that priority.
I don't set that priority. No, that's
right.
set at through the work of the town manager and the board of selectmen, and for enterprise funds, it's the enterprise
And the school committee.
and those.
Yeah.
But it's my responsibility to provide them all of the information necessary to make those sound financial decisions
In a way they can understand.
in a way that's readable to everybody, not only them, but everything that's
Right.
on the website needs to be in terms and that everybody can understand and can be able to see how we're getting to that point.